day and welcome to the Eyes Open Network. I want to start today with a quote from Ron Paul, and I was looking and doing some research this morning. This quote caught my attention it was on the Open Hedge website. The chaos that one day will ensue from our 35-year experiment with worldwide fiat money will require a return to money of real value. We will know that day is approaching when oil-producing countries demand gold or its equivalent for their oil rather than dollars or euros. The sooner, the better. Ron Paul. What does that tell you? Well, there's a very direct connection to the petrodollar system and the American dollar's survival. There's a great article on Open Hedge, and I'm going to basically read most of it and parts of it to give you a better sense of what's going on there, but you can see the full article on Open Hedge. Ron Paul is calling for an end of the petrodollar system. The system is one of the main reasons the US dollar is the world's premier reserve currency. Essentially, what Ron Paul has been saying is that understanding that petrodollar system, as I mentioned earlier, and it forces affecting the best way to predict the US dollar will collapse. If you take a look at the petrodollar system and the forces that infect it, that's the best way to predict the collapse of the US economy. It's very important. It's critically important. When a dollar loses its coveted status as a world's reserve currency, the window of opportunity for Americans to protect their wealth from the U.S. government will definitely shut. At that point, the U.S. government will implement the same destructive measures other desperate governments have used throughout the history: overt capital controls, wealth confiscation, people controls, price and wage controls, pension naturalizations, etc. The dollar's demise will wipe out the wealth of a lot of people, but it will also trigger political and social consequences likely to be far more damaging than the financial fallout. The two key takeaways from this entire thought process are simple. The US dollar status as a premier reserve currency is tied to the petrodollar system. The sustainability of the petrodollar system relies on volatile geopolitics in the Middle East. Just those two statements alone should have you sitting up in your chair going, wait a minute, I got to listen to what this guy has to say. And then go do some more research so you can form yourself an opinion and spread the word that people need to open their eyes and be ready. The Bretton Woods International Monetary System, which the Allied powers created in 1944, turned the dollar into the world's premier reserve currency. After World War II, the U.S. had by far the largest gold reserves in the world, around 706 million ounces. These large reserves, in addition to winning the war, allowed the U.S. to reconstruct the global monetary system around the dollar. The Bretton Woods system tied virtually every country's currency to the U.S. dollar through a fixed exchange rate. It also tied the U.S. dollar to gold at a fixed exchange rate. Countries around the world stored dollars for international trade or to exchange with the U.S. government at the official rate for gold, $35 an ounce at the time. By the late 1960s, excessive spending on welfare and warfare, combined with Federal Reserve monetizing the deficits, drastically increased the number of dollars in circulation relative to the gold backing them. Boy, that's a unique system. We've heard of this before. To stop the drain, President Nixon ended the dollar's convertibility to gold in 1971. That was a very pivotal moment when Nixon stopped the relationship between paper money and its gold backing counterpart. He ended that. It also ended that Bretton Woods system because the dollar was no longer backed by anything real. 1971. More than 40 years ago. So for 40 years we've been running in a system whereby nothing backs the dollars that you carry around in your pocket or you have sitting in your bank account. In other words, The U.S. government defaulted on its promise to back the dollar with gold. This eliminated the main motivation for other countries to hold large U.S. dollar reserves and use the U.S. dollar for international trade. With the dollar no longer convertible into gold, demand for dollars for foreign nations was sure to fall, and with it, the dollar's purchasing power. OPEC, a group of oil-producing countries, passed numerous resolutions after the end of Bretton Woods stating its need to maintain the real value of its earnings. It even discussed accepting gold for oil. Ultimately, OPEC significantly increased the nominal dollar price of oil. For the dollar to maintain its status as the world reserve currency, the U.S. would have to concoct a new arrangement to have foreign countries a compelling reason to hold and use dollars. And enter the petrodollar system. So in 1971, Nixon eliminated the relationship between gold and paper money. In 1972, or between 1972 and 1974, in the couple of years following the 1971 decision by Nixon, the U.S. government made a series of agreements with Saudi Arabia. These agreements created the petrodollar system. So the original system was created with the backdoor dealings between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. government. The same country, Saudi Arabia, that the September 11 pilots were said to be from, or after all the dust cleared and everybody was looking at this from a more critical point of view. Interesting. The U.S. government chose Saudi Arabia because of its vast petroleum reserves, its dominant position in OPEC, and its, we'll call it its perceived corruptibility of the royal family in Saudi Arabia. Well, that was a very correct assumption, that they could corrupt the Saudi royal family. In essence, the petrodollar system was an agreement that the U.S. government would guarantee the survival of the House of Saud, and in exchange, Saudi Arabia would, number one, use its dominant position in OPEC to ensure that oil, transactions would happen in U.S. dollars. Number two, invest a large amount of its dollars in the oil revenue in U.S. Treasury securities and use the interest payments from those securities to pay U.S. companies to modernize the infrastructure in Saudi Arabia. Number three, guarantee the price of oil within limits acceptable to the U.S. and prevent other oil embargo by other OPEC members. So basically, Saudi Arabia is going to ensure that U.S. dollars are being used. They're going to invest in all kinds of oil, or invest all kinds of dollars in the oil revenue, and Saudi Arabia would keep OPEC in check. Oil is the world's largest and most traded and most strategic commodity on the market. This is nothing new. This is not news to anybody. At least it shouldn't be. Needing to use dollars for oil transactions is a very compelling reason for foreign countries to keep large U.S. dollars on reserve. For example, if Italy wants to buy oil from Kuwait, it has to purchase U.S. dollars on the foreign exchange market to pay for the oil first. Then they can purchase the oil. This creates an artificial market for U.S. dollars that would not otherwise exist. The demand is artificial because the U.S. dollar is just a middleman in the transaction. That has nothing to do with the U.S. product or service. And in the end, it translates into increased purchasing power and a deeper, more liquid market for the U.S. dollar and U.S. treasuries. That seems convenient. Additionally, the U.S. has a unique privilege not having to use foreign currency to buy imports, including oil. Instead, it just uses its own currency that they can print. Oh, yeah, we're running low on money, need to buy more oil, let's print some more money. Like, it's a crazy deal. So here's what you need to be paying attention to. Geopolitical sands of the Middle East change all the time, and they're always changing, and they're rapidly changing right now. Saudi Arabia's strategic regional positioning is weakening. Saudi Arabia no longer has as much clout as they did before. Iran, which is not news to anybody, they're on the rise, and they are not part of the petrodollar system. So Iran is on the rise, and I talked about this in a previous Eyes Open Network video, that Iran is the next site and the last piece of the puzzle for World War III to officially be announced, because Iran is on the rise, Saudi Arabia is weakening, Iran is not part of the petrodollar system, and the petrodollar system is the backbone of the U.S. economy. That's critical. All right. U.S. military interventions are failing, which is obvious what's going on in Syria, and the emerging BRICS countries are creating potential alternatives to the U.S.-dominated economic security arrangements. This all affects the sustainability of the petrodollar system. If you don't know what the BRICS countries are, it's BRICS. Just take a look it up, Google it. You'll see what we're talking about. Russia's in there, China, much of it, but ultimately, this is a big deal, and the sustainability of the petrodollar system is on the bubble here. When you watch the deteriorating relationship between the U.S. and the Saudi Arabia, keep an eye on it. Watch that deteriorating relationship, because that's where the rubber meets the road. The Saudis are furious because they don't think the U.S. are holding up their end of the petrodollar deal by more aggressively attacking the rivals in the region. That's part of the deal. And you wonder why the U.S. is always getting involved in everybody else's wars, because they've all got a deal with Saudi Arabia that they need to get their asses in there and start blowing stuff up. But they haven't been doing that as aggressively as they promised. The Saudis have, pardon me, back to the Saudis being upset that they're not that the U.S. is not more aggressively attacking their rivals. This suggests that they may not uphold their part of the deal much longer, namely selling their oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. So if the Saudis stop selling their oil exclusively in U.S. dollars, look out. The Saudis have even suggested a, quote, major shift is underway in the relationship with the U.S. To date, though, they haven't matched their words with action, so it may be a temper tantrum or a bluff, but you need to keep an eye on it. Remember, we're here to let you know what things to watch for so that you can be prepared. The Saudis need an outside protector. So far, they haven't found any suitable replacements for the U.S. In any case, they're using truly unprecedented language that they haven't used before. The situation may reach a turning point when the U.S. officials start expounding on a need to transform the monarchy in Saudi Arabia into a quote-unquote democracy. Don't count on that happening as long as Saudi oil sells exclusively in U.S. dollars. For the first time in decades, observers are calling into question the viability of the Saudi currency. The Saudi central bank currently pegs their currency at a rate of 3.75 rials per U.S. dollar. The Saudi government spends a ton of money on welfare to keep its citizens completely sedated and unaware of what's going on. Lower oil prices, plus the cost of their mischief in the region, are cutting deep into the government revenue, so there's less money to spend on welfare. There's a serious crunch in their budget, so they've only been able to stay afloat by draining their foreign exchange reserves, and that threatens their currency. So that's the Saudi Arabia side of things. Timing of this collapse comes down to this. Long before Nixon ended the Bretton Woods system in 1971, when he disassociated the paper dollar to the gold equivalent, it was clear that there was a shift in the global monetary system was going to be inevitable. Today, another shift seems just as inevitable and far more alarming. And as Ron Paul explained, there's one sure way to know when the shift is imminent. You'll know the day is approaching when oil-producing countries demand gold or its equivalent for their oil rather than dollars or euros. Part of that quote that I mentioned earlier. That's when you're going to know they're flipping on a dime, because the oil-producing countries don't want money anymore. They don't want the U.S. dollar anymore. They want gold or some sort of hard currency that they can count. It's very possible that one day soon Americans will wake up to the new reality, just as they did in 1971 when Nixon severed the dollar's final link to gold. The petrodollar system has allowed the U.S. government and many U.S. citizens to live far beyond their means for decades, over 40 years. It also gives the U.S. unchecked geopolitical leverage. The U.S. can exclude virtually any country from the U.S. dollar-based financial system and, by extension, the vast majority of international trade. And the U.S. has been taking this unique position for granted, and it will disappear once the dollar loses its premier status. That will be the tipping point. Afterward, the U.S. government will be desperate enough to implement those capital controls, the people controls, nationalization of retirement savings, and other forms of confiscation of your hard-earned money. I urge you should prepare, if you haven't already prepared, be ready. I mean, it's not happening tomorrow, January 16th, but I tell you that you should be prepared. I hope the information I've provided, that the primary source was OpenHedge today, that the petrodollar system is something that, if you know nothing about the petrodollar system, I strongly urge you to get informed, starting right now, because it will be the critical component to the U.S. financial collapse. And if you want to be prepared, you should know what the signs you should be looking for so that you know that it's coming, so that you can be ready. You can give yourself a head start over the rest of the people that are just busy watching Sunday Night Football. It's been another Eyes Open Network video and news update. Please make some comments below. Let me know what you think. Let us know how you feel. Let us know whether you have an opinion on the petrodollar system. Take care, guys. Have yourself a great day.